In this video, we're going to start our discussion on HUD screens. It's been requested recently. I want to cover all of them, but honestly, there are a number of different kinds of HUD screens, so it's kind of a big topic, a little too big for a single video. So in this video specifically, we're going to talk about inventory HUD screens, and I promise you I will be doing a video on every single type of HUD screen there is at some point, so please stay tuned for that. For right now, let's focus on inventory. So here we can see that I'm in a scene that came with the crime mini kit, and got some officers talking over there. I added those just for ambiance. And we have our evidence bags here, which I've turned into collectibles. We'll talk about how to do that here in a moment. But notice one thing real quick. There's a little plus sign that shows up when I put my cursor over the bag. That's really important because it allows you to kind of select on the item, and if the item is really small, then it might be really difficult to get the cursor just right so that you can get the prompt and press E to pick it up. So just bear that in mind. Choose your items carefully. But here if we press I, this is just the RPG screen that comes with Mac, so you can press, create RPG or whatever it is in the storyboard. I'll show you that in a moment. And this is the screen that comes with it, and this is fully functional. This is pretty much what we're going to build, except look different. So you can see I can select on the item, I can drag the item around. If I select the item, the name of the item shows up here, and the image of the item shows. I can put it into my hotbar if I need to. Gold doesn't really matter for this particular example. And then we have our functional buttons here. I can drop the item that's selected or use it if it's a consumable. And I can also exit the screen. Okay, so let's go set up our own HUD screen and just kind of see how all of that works. But before we do, let's set up our collectible. So here is our evidence bag, and we'll start with the general section. I've turned physics on, that way we have a collision detection. We'll be able to pick it up. It also, depends on what you're trying to set up, but you could make it affected by gravity. You can give it different properties, so just kind of suit that to your own needs. But we have is collectible. That's really important. When we check this box, what happens is we get this section here, collectible settings, which we'll cover in a second. So make sure that's checked. We'll set up the behavior next. We have collect object. So most of the settings in this are pretty self-explanatory, pretty typical, which you would see in other behaviors. So I won't go through line by line. I'll just point out that you do have the option of either an automatic pickup, meaning once I get within range, it'll just pick it up immediately, or prompt them. If we select manual, it'll give them the prompt. So that's really the thing that you should probably think about for your game and what you're trying to achieve. Okay, and we have our collectible settings. So here we can see the evidence bag shows up, the image, and it's going to ask us for a name for the item. So this is really just to distinguish it from other collectible items. If you have multiple collectibles in the database, then that's going to set it apart, give it a unique name. Item cost, item value, these have to do with like vendors, and we'll cover that in a future episode where we're able to buy and sell items through a vendor. Item container, what it says is enter a container for this item that determines where the item starts in the game. So if we had a container that was already defined and it had its own container inventory, then we could place the name of that container here, and it would spawn inside the chest. Item ingredients has to do with crafting. So it says enter ingredients separated by comma that to be used by the recipe. So if we wanted to put paper bag, comma, evidence, then we could craft an evidence bag. We're not going to cover crafting in this video, but we'll definitely circle back to that in a later video. Same thing with item style. This says enter style for the item, whether or not it's a recipe or a spell. We're going to cover all that in the future video. But this is all, we need to do to set up an item as a collectible. So now let's go build a HUD screen. Okay. So as I mentioned before, there is the add RPG screens here. And if I click that, it's going to add like 8 different screens, including this HUD screen that you see here. But I think most people, they want to create their own screens and they want to be able to customize it. And I think getting a sense for how to create these screens is going to inform later screens, right? So this way I started with a really simple one, but I think you'll start, to detect patterns over time. So let's go ahead and add a new screen. And we'll just click edit. So we get a nice, clean, empty screen here. Now let's walk through what we see right now, get a lay of the land, and then we'll start building our screen. So we have the visuals up here. There's 3 buttons. There's add an image, add some text, add a button. And then we have readouts, a whole bunch of them here. I'm not going to name each one of these, but I think the primary thing to understand is the difference between what's a visual and what's a readout, and how do I know when to use which, right? I think that's really important. So let's start with visuals. And I think the simplest one to understand is some text. So if I add some text, what I really have here is a label, right? It doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any settings that would, tie back to a global or anything like that. It's just a label. It's just text on a screen. It's the simplest form, and I can change it here, right, by just adding some words there. And I can change like its font style and position and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's pretty benign, just a label. We have a button. A button can be tied back to something else. It usually does something, right? Like drop the item we saw, or use, or leave the screen. We'll use these here in the future. But that's just a button, a clickable button on the screen. And then add an image is a little bit more like the text, where it's really just an image. It doesn't actually do anything. It's just some color on the screen. Okay. Whereas these here have purpose. They really do something, right? And I think that's the distinction between the readouts and the visuals, other than the button actually does have an action, but you get the idea. So we'll start with a user-defined global image. Click on that. So it gives you an image to start with. It's really just a kind of a placeholder. I like to turn on the grid just so I can set up my screen and make it look really nice. I'm just going to press 1 here, and that makes a really fine grid that you can just really kind of finely tune where it's going to go. You can make it bigger if you really want to, but it just pops around a lot. So I guess if you're using big images, that's where that would be helpful. But for smaller images, or really getting it exactly placed, precisely where you want it, 1 is fine. Show grid is of course important, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see it. I think it'll still work. It just can't see it. So let's change the image. Now I have the Wasteland DLC, which is here. You may not have that yet. That's okay. Use whatever you can, or whatever you find. Just try to find some kind of background image that might look nice. So I'm just going to scroll through here. A lot of images, but all I was looking for is this one here. So we'll add that. So we can center it, but it's a little small for what we are trying to do. So I'm just going to change the size of this to 150. I'll put it right up at the top. Now we want to label what we have on the screen, so we'll add a label here. We'll call this inventory. There we go. So we're labeling what we have in front of us, so the player knows what he's looking at. All right, so but this image in and of itself doesn't actually do anything, right? I can't add items to this grid because it's really just a background image. So now we need a panel to go over the top of that image to define where things are actually going to slot into place. So we'll click panel, and I'm going to choose, I'm going to mix some screens here. So here in the HUD library, about midfield, there's a 6x6 grid. So I'm going to use that one. You probably still you probably have that one as well. So go ahead and use that if you want to. And I'll just pop that right here is good. All right. So this panel is where the items are actually going to collect, and the reason why I need this and I can't just use the global image that we added before that is because if I were to pick up an item, that item would show up over here at the top left corner. See, this is the top left corner of this image. It would show up over here, right? It wouldn't actually show up where we want it. So this is going to put it right where we want it. And we need to tell it a little bit about the image that we've selected. So we're going to tell it that it has 6 columns and 6 rows. We are going to tell it what it is, right? So it says user defined global name. What is the name of this panel? What does it do? It's the inventory for the player. So we're going to choose that. And that just defined this panel as the inventory screen for the player. This is where the inventory will collect. And the player can have 6 items across, 6 items down. That's the total amount. Now, if we wanted more items than that, let's suppose we wanted this to be 12 rows, we could do that. But now we need a scroll bar. And in fact, even if we didn't do that, we need a scroll bar. So either way, you absolutely have to do this next step. What I found when I was working through this is if I didn't do this, it didn't work. I couldn't select the items. So the scroll bar is really integral. So let's add that next. We'll add a user-defined global image, and we'll search in our bank. Again, HUD library is the out-of-the-box stuff. I'm just going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and here we can see the scroll bar box. That's what this little thin bar is. So I'm going to choose that. Notice that I have to click directly on the image itself. If I click over here, it won't actually select it. So just click right on it and click add. And we're just going to put this right here. So, and we can tell it that this is a scroll bar box. So now it knows what it is. And we'll do that again. This time we need the handle. So under HUD library, scroll that down. Here's our scroll bar handle. Okay. And you can use, honestly, you can use any image you want to. It doesn't have to be this one, but I'm just using this because it's convenient and it looks pretty good. So we'll just place that there. Now again, even if I didn't have more than 6 columns and 6 rows, I still need this. So make sure that you have this set up and make sure that you're telling the handle that it's a handle. Okay, these are just predefined globals that you can use because they know you're going to need them. So they're there for you because you would need them whether you like it or not. So there you go. All right, so next up, we're going to need, when we select on the item, we want to see what it is that we clicked on. So we're going to need user-defined global text. And the reason we need user-defined global text as opposed to just a text is it's more than just a label. This is going to tick and tie back to what it is that we selected. So here we can choose selected title, right? We can also use like, description or cost or value or whatever it is that, that it is. But for right now, for our purposes, title, the thing that we clicked on. And then we also need another image. Put that right here. And again, you can find this one at the very bottom of the HUD library, and it's called tile. It's like, it looks big, but when you click on it, it's actually rather small. You can change the size of it if you want to. If you want to make it a little bit bigger, easier to see. Let's put it a little bit below the text. All right, so now when I select an item, the name of the item is going to show up and a little image of the item. But now I've selected it, I need to do something with it, right? I'm either going to consume it or I'm going to drop it. So let's add those. Now we need buttons. So we're going to add a button here and another button over here. Okay. And this doesn't really fit with the theme, so we're going to change the image. So here you can see this is the button as it is normally, as it's depicted here. And then this is the button when I cursor over it. I get that difference in the look of it. So I can choose, let's choose this lighter color as the default. Same thing with this one. And then for the hover over, we'll get the darker image. There we go. So now when I hover over it, it's very clear that I've hovered over it. It's selected. Okay. Now they're a little big, so I'm going to change this. I'm going to resize this down to 75. Okay. And we need labels for them, right? We need to know what they are. So let's see. It doesn't really matter which one's which. One of them's going to be use. One of them's going to be drop. Just want to line this up exactly where I want it. Okay. So let's make this one. Let's make this one use. So we're going to type in the word use. Now the word use is really important. It doesn't matter if it's uppercase, lowercase, whatever it is, but the word use is a keyword. So it's, it knows what it means to use something. It doesn't know what it means to consume something, right? It knows what it means to drop something, but it doesn't know, what it means to throw away, right? So you have to use the word use for now. I think in the future they're probably going to make that a little more flexible, but this is just a point in time, and at this moment, that's the keyword. So the word use. And we also need to tell it, okay, what do? We have a keyword and we have a button here that gives us a visual, but it doesn't actually do anything. If I clicked on this button, nothing would happen. So I need an action. And in this case, we have a lot of actions that kind of, we can select from. But the one we want is return button ID to Lua. So what does that mean? So if you're familiar with programming, you'll understand what functions are. If you're not, that's okay. You don't need to be. And a function can take a parameter, and we can pass a parameter through a function, and then it'll do something with that parameter. That's essentially what's happening here. So there's a function in the background that's waiting for a keyword to be sent to it. And it knows about these keywords. It knows what use is, and when it gets use, it knows what to do. When it gets drop, it knows what to do. So we're just going to pass it. We're going to tell it, the keyword that we want to use for this button is use. We're passing that through to Lua, and then it'll consume the item. Okay, same thing with this one here. We're going to type the word drop. There we go. And make sure we configure it. There we go. So now we have some functional buttons. And we're still not done. There's still a couple more things we need to do. This screen, now that we've activated, and by the way, I didn't mention it before, but here you can see that it's P to bring up this screen for now. We can always change that to whatever key we want, but I'll just leave it as P. So when I open this screen up, I can't close it. There's no way to close the screen once I have it open. So we need to add that as well. Let's put it over here. And I'll just stick with the same theme for the buttons that we have before. There we go. And this one, the keyword is leave. Okay. So it can't be close or exit. It has to be leave. And same thing. Now this threw me for a loop because I thought it was going to be close screen. Wouldn't that make sense? But it wasn't. It's return button ID to Lua. So I'm not entirely sure what closed screen means off the top of my head. I know it was explained to me at one point. I just forgotten. It doesn't matter. We need to return the button ID to Lua, and then it'll know what to do. Okay. All right. So a couple more things that we want from the original screen. Again, you can add whatever cool stuff you think is important for an inventory screen, but I'm just kind of, giving this as an example. We need our money, right, to display somewhere. And I'll just put it over here. So the first thing we need is a label, because again, this isn't really going to do anything. It's just going to label what it is that we're looking at. And I'm going to call this bottle caps. Geez, where did I get that? Can anybody guess where I got that idea from? And we're going to change the text to 20. Okay. Put that right here. Okay. So now we need a user-defined global. So what is that? That's a variable, right? So in programming, once again, just for those that aren't familiar, you have different kinds of variables. It's not really important what the distinction is between a local variable and a global variable. All you need to know is when we click user defined global, what we're doing is we're declaring a variable. So we'll click on that, and this variable happens to be a number, right? So we'll put that in its place. But this variable doesn't really have a name. Right now, the name of the variable is 0. So we need to give it a name. Now there is a variable already in there called my money, and that's why like when you press I and you see your gold, I think it says, and it's like 90 or 70 or whatever it is, that's the global that it's referencing is my money. We don't necessarily want to use that. We could, there's nothing wrong with that, but in this case I want to create a bottle cap variable. So, and you don't have to say my bottle cap, you can just say bottle caps, you can say whatever you want. But why not? Let's just call it my bottle caps. Let's put my cursor there. So my bottle caps. Now here's really important. Once you've typed out the word that you want to use, press enter. That saves it. That submits it to the code in the background. If you click off of it or do something else, it's not going to accept it. So you have to do that. Now you have my bottle caps. You can switch between that and whatever the custom value is, which again, my bottle caps. So we can see here under user defined globals, it's been declared and it has its own value. And you can see the number changing up at the top, right? Which is different than this one. So that's how you add a new global. And if we wanted another one, we would just click on user defined global and add another one. We could add as many as we need. Okay. All right. So now we've got everything wired up. Let's test it. Let's make sure I didn't goof this up and it actually works. All right, so click on this, click play. All right, so if I pick up an evidence bag, we know that pressing I, we have our evidence bag and it's movable. So now let's press P, and you notice that it's in the slot that I left it in. We can move it around, click on it. Looks like I did goof one thing up here. I'm not getting my image the way we want it. Let's see here. Can we drop it? Can drop it. We can leave. So I must have messed up one thing. So let's go fix that real quick. Here, I did not change this to be selected image. So it needs to be selected image. My apologies. But this is the kind of thing that can happen when you're developing. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to miss a couple of things. And that's why we test to catch those little mistakes. So all part of the process. I stopped beating myself up a long time ago when it comes to making little mistakes like that, because it's part of the process. And, I'm comfortable with it now. I've learned to embrace it. In fact, an old mentor of mine years and years ago, when I was first learning how to program, he said, never expect it to work, right? Always expect it to fail. And then when it fails, it's okay. You were expecting that. You find out what it is that's wrong, you fix it, and you try again. And you expect it to fail, and if it fails, that's okay. You see what went wrong, and you fix it, and you try again. And eventually what happens is it works. And then you're pleasantly surprised. So that's the advice that I got years ago, and I've kind of stuck with it. But I hope that helps you. But that's it. That's, we've created a functional inventory screen from scratch. And I think by doing this, it's also going to shed light on what the other screens are going to be like. So if you want to get a head start and play around with it, go and examine the out-of-the-box HUD screens. Now that you know what to look for and you can identify the parts and pieces, I think it'll be a little easier to understand. But I'm still going to make videos on each and every one in the future. But if you don't want to wait for me, you can always go and dissect those at your leisure. If you liked the video, if you learned something new, please be sure to click the like button. It helps the channel out. I want to grow the channel and get as much exposure as I can, because I'm wanting to make Max popular. The more popular Max is, the more people using it, the more attention it gets, the better it gets as a whole. So it helps everybody, it lifts all boats. So be sure to click the like button. Helps out a lot. If you're new here, or if you haven't yet subscribed, now's the time to do so. Where we're gonna have a new video on every single behavior, all the HUDs, and whatever else I can think of. So stay tuned for that. And lastly, if you want a notification for when I post a video, I don't keep a regular schedule. I know it kind of seems like I might, because it's every few days, but honestly, it just depends on when I have time and what I've got prepared. So it could be a little bit irregular here in the future. So if you want a notification for when those new videos come out, just click the bell icon and that'll help you out. But that's it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.